Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The actions and words of Pope Pius XII during World War II have become a matter of controversy since the play The Deputy first premiered in the 1960s. Since that time, several books, including the best-selling Hitler's Pope, have suggested that Pius XII was not only silent to the Nazi exterminations of the Jewish people, but somehow complicit in those crimes. My guest tonight has looked at the historical record and come to a very different conclusion. He is Rabbi David Dalin, a professor of history and political science at Ave Maria University and the author of the new book, The Myth of Hitler's Pope, How Pope Pius XII Rescued Jews from the Nazis. Rabbi Dalin, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Raymond, thank you for inviting me.
Not at all. I want to start with why you decided to entitle this book, The Myth of Hitler's Pope.
Well, it's obviously a response in some ways to John Cornwell and to his fellow critics. From my research, I arrived at the exact opposite of Cornwell's conclusion. That is, that Pius XII was not Hitler's Pope, but he was truly one of the great friends of the Jewish people at a moment in history when it really mattered most. Let me give you a few examples.
Sure.
I have a lot of documentation in here. Some of your viewers may know, during World War II, during the Holocaust, approximately 80% of the Jews of Nazi-occupied Europe were exterminated, were killed. And yet, over 80%, close to 85% of the Jews of Italy, of Rome and Italy, survived. Now, as I argue and document, this is more than happenstance. This is more than coincidence, as some papal critics would allege. It has to do with the personal intervention of Pius XII in the situation, which saved the lives of tens of thousands of Italian Jews, especially Roman Jews. Now, let me give you just a couple of examples. And I know we don't have all the time, but during the Nazi occupation of Rome, starting in October of 1943, it's estimated that close to 3,000 Jews were sheltered and hidden at Castel Gandolfo. Castel Gandolfo, of course, is the papal summer residence outside of Rome. Now, as I suggest in my book, at no other location, no other site in all of Nazi-occupied Europe were as many Jews sheltered and hidden for as long a time as at Castel Gandolfo. And it was truly a remarkable experience. Indeed, kosher food was provided for some of the very pious Jews who observed the Jewish dietary laws. Actually, most of the Jews sheltered there did. Now, this despite the allegations of papal critics, this could not have taken place without the direct approval, involvement, and intervention of Pius XII.
Yeah, I've seen some of those pictures where you see the people, the whole families laying out on the big thick steps there at Castel Gandolfo, sleeping in the hallways and everything.
Yes, very much so. And mind you, by the way, most of the books, and it's not just Cornwell, there have been a whole host of them in recent years, most of the books don't even mention Castel Gandolfo in this context. And the few that do say, well, you know, this was nice, it had nothing to do with the Pope. By the way, incidentally, you know, within Rome during the Nazi occupation, in 155 monasteries, convents, and churches, Jews were hidden and sheltered, as well as within the buildings of the Vatican themselves itself. And this could not have taken place again without the directive of the Pope.
Rabbi Dalin, why would you, as an observant Jew, be interested in this topic and this controversy of Pius XII and his reputation? I mean, well, you know, with all due respect, it's not of religious importance to you, certainly.
Well, I'll tell you, I came to the conclusion that I guess the motivation to write this was to correct what I think has been a terrible injustice to a very great man in history, and who deserves whose historical reputation and legacy has been tarnished. And basically, I wrote this in a very simple way to set the historical record straight. You know, it's interesting. Pius XII was truly a voice in the wilderness during the 1930s. The one comparable voice in the wilderness was Winston Churchill, incidentally. And by the way, one of the fascinating footnotes is that one of the other preeminent, probably the preeminent Jewish defender of Pius XII is none other than Sir Martin Gilbert, the official biographer of Winston Churchill. But number one, in answer to your question, to really correct an historical injustice. And, you know, when I've spoken to Jewish audiences, I've said the following. I've said, if Pius XII had really been Hitler's Pope, one would have expected that the most devastating attacks and critiques would come from Jewish scholars and journalists.
Right.
The opposite has been the case. Some of the most forceful defenses have come from Jews.
Right. We have a few of these defenses from Golda Meir and some others chronicled here. Shall we play those now? Should we let people take a peek at those? This is some of what was said shortly after the death of Pius XII. Here's what his contemporaries, particularly Jewish contemporaries, said about him. Take a look.
The chief rabbi of Jerusalem said, "The people of Israel will never forget what His Holiness Pope Pius XII and his illustrious delegates are doing for us unfortunate brothers and sisters in the most tragic hours of our history, which is proof of divine providence in this world." Israel's first foreign minister, Moshe Sharett, said, "I told the Pope that my first duty was to thank him and through him the Catholic Church on behalf of the Jewish public for all they had done in various countries to save Jews, to save children, and Jews in general. We are deeply grateful to the Catholic Church." Albert Einstein wrote in Time magazine, "Only the Church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign for suppressing truth. I had never any special interest in the Church before, but now I feel a great affection and admiration because the Church alone has had the courage and persistence to stand for intellectual truth and moral freedom." And Israeli representative to the UN Golda Meir said, "When fearful martyrdom came to our people in the decade of Nazi terror, the voice of the Pope was raised for its victims. The life of our times was enriched by a voice speaking out about great moral truths above the tumult of daily conflict." But perhaps no one was more grateful than the chief rabbi of Rome, Emilio Zoli. He would write, "No hero in all of history was more militant, more fought against, none more heroic than Pius XII. The rabbi was so moved he would become a Catholic after the war."
So, I guess, Rabbi Dalin, my question is, what changed between that time in the late 50s when you had these glowing tributes coming out to the present?
Well, let me tell you also, by the way, this helps to answer your previous question to me. One of the reasons also I wrote this book was to document these tributes that not only many Catholics don't realize, but many Jews don't realize. You know, these were Jewish leaders in Israel, Europe, and the United States were unanimous in their gratitude to and praise for Pius XII. And these are largely forgotten. When I mention these tributes, and there were so many others also, can I mention this one other thing to you? And then I want to finish, and then I want to tell you what changed. In addition to these tributes, and these are only a small portion of them, in 1955, on the 10th anniversary of the liberation of Rome, the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra was sent by the Israeli government to Rome, where they played at the Vatican a concert in tribute to Pius XII. Why is this so remarkable? Your listeners may know that the Israeli Philharmonic has never played the music of Richard Wagner, the German composer, because of his being a notorious anti-Semite and because of he was Hitler's favorite composer. His music was played at Nazi functions and rallies. Now, in the 1950s, there was a huge community of Holocaust survivors in Israel. It is absolutely implausible that the Israeli public opinion would have countenanced the Israeli government paying for the Israeli Philharmonic to travel to Rome to play a concert in tribute to someone who was thought to be Hitler's Pope. Rather, this was a gesture of Jewish collective gratitude and praise to a great world leader who had been there to rescue Jews during the Holocaust years.
I want to remind our viewers, if you have a question